Now, the idea of birth can be very messy, but there's one sequence that happens in this film, and usually I'd be scared, but it kind of reminded me of this. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Hey guys!
Howdly diddly.
Welcome back to a brand new video here on the channel. Today it is going to be a movie review for The First Omen, the prequel to the 1970s film The Omen. Now, I actually, fun fact, just watched the very first Omen for the very first time a couple of days ago. Never watched it, and it was one of those things very late to the game, much like the original Exorcist. In terms of my thoughts on the original Omen, I actually really dug it. I think it still stands as I still think it stands the test of time. It's one of those slow burn, subdued, subtle horror films, much like The Exorcist. I like what I saw on screen. It's not an overly gory film. The gore is very subdued. At the same time, when the gore happens or when the violence happens, it hits hard. And that last shot at the end of Damien, loved it. Nice little twist right at the end. And of course, I wanted to watch it going into The First Omen because, like I said, this is indeed a prequel to the original 1970s Omen film. This takes place right before the prologue of the First Omen. Now, this time around, we have actress Nell Tiger-Free portraying Maggie, and encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of evil incarnate. The hell was that? Now, my first initial thoughts on the film. It gave me the absolute willies and just made me feel downright uncomfortable. And that is a very good thing. With that being said, this is not a perfect film, but at the same time, I loved what I experienced in that theater. It made me unnerved. It made me feel just this sense of dread. There's something about these films taking place in the 70s with some crackerjack production value and costumes and set pieces that are very period correct that just makes me feel very uneasy. And then when you're dealing with a lead character that's questioning their faith, and if they are indeed going insane, or this is really happening. Now, we've also got Bill Nighy, aka Davy Jones, in this, who does a wonderful performance, but the standout performance is Nell Tiger-Free. She does an incredible job, and I'm going to compare this to Immaculate because it is a film set about nuns and strange things going on, but I think that Nell Tiger-Free runs ring around Sydney Sweeney's performance in Immaculate. She goes through the absolute ringer in this film. And obviously I'm not going to give anything away. This is a spoiler-free review, even though this film has been doing the rounds for several days now. I think her performance is a standout and one of the best I've seen in a long time in terms of a performance in a horror film. Now, what I really dug about this film is the pacing. Yes, it is a very slow burn, much like the original Omen, but it's done in a way where the slow burn kind of continues throughout the whole film until the climax of the film. Now, there are some jump scares sprinkled throughout and a sprinkling of context and some more backstory into what's happened to Margaret and also where she is studying and becoming a nun. But when it comes to the jump scares, they aren't your traditional jump scares. These are jump scares that made me scared, that made me unnerved and just uncomfortable. And it's done in almost a subtle, slow way where it's not the traditional jump scare where the music stops, you hear a creak and then boom, jump scare. The music can still be going, you can still hear curtains flowing, and then all of a sudden it's right there in front of you and it slowly happens before your eyes. In one instance, there's a scare where it's darkness and you see something slowly emerge from the darkness. You can just hear slimy skin and it's just so off-putting. To me, this has elements of Hereditary. I don't know what it is, but I think it's also one of those things where you've got to look at certain frames and look in the background, see what's happening in the background and not in the foreground. My gripes with the film, two things. I think after the climax, and we're pretty much done in terms of the storyline, there's an epilogue. I'm going to call it an epilogue, where I think it's totally unnecessary and it's making the audience feel dumb. Like, it's one of those things where I feel like the audience could get it because they're essentially putting it out right in front of you and just showing you the answers that are going to lead into the original Omen film. And I think it was totally unnecessary. We also see a glimpse of something, an entity, and I think it gave away too much, even though it's just glimpses of this entity. And the glimpses that I saw, half were practical and half were CGI, and I just think the CGI was just a little bit of a letdown. I would have been happy to see nothing at all. I would have rather just left it up to my imagination, and also relying on illustrations, paintings, carvings, rock carvings, where you see an entity or a demon and you think, is that what it looks like? Is that what it looks like? But with what I saw, it was kind of a bit of a letdown and a bit of a whimper. But those are my only two gripes. Again, I just think too much was given away and explained to the audience right at the end in this little quote-unquote epilogue. Totally unnecessary. You could have ended the film, say, 5 or 10 minutes earlier. Because I feel at that point, we've already figured out as an audience what's about to go down and what's about to transpire in terms of linking into the original Omen film. The score is so unsettling. It's just unsettling like what I'm seeing up on screen. There are just these violent orchestral strings that are being plucked in them. We also have the inclusion of the original Omen chant, which is great. It's sort of a new rendition, but at the same time, it's nice to hear that beat once again. Even though I'm fresh to the original Omen film, it's still fresh in my head when it comes to that particular score. In an age now where we have prequels, direct sequels, it's one of those things where you're going to roll your eyes and think they're not going to do the original justice. But I feel with the First Omen, it's a damn solid attempt at a prequel to a film that is so beloved and is quite frankly still scary to this day. I definitely think it holds up, even though I had only seen the film for the first time a couple of days ago. To me, if I was like a teenager back in the 70s and watching that film for the first time, would have scared the fucking shit out of me. In terms of the gore factor, I wouldn't say it's overly gory, but much like the first film, when the violence happens, it's brutal and then it's gone. There are some quite confronting and shocking images and some nice little throwbacks to the original Omen film in terms of a death or two here and there. I actually dig it. Like usually sometimes with a throwback or copying what the original film or the original source material has done can be kind of lame, but I think this one pulled it off quite nicely. Again, paired with a wonderful performance by Nell Tiger-Free as Maggie, our main character, I just think this as a damn solid attempt. I wouldn't say continuing, but going back before the events of the original Omen film and kind of putting things in place and setting the tracks for what is ultimately going to be the original Omen film from the 70s. Despite the fact that I thought the film could be 5 or 10 minutes shorter with an epilogue that was just completely useless and just seeing too much of something and an entity that I thought we didn't need to see at all, when you can rely, like I said, once again on illustrations, paintings, rock carvings, descriptions, to leave it up to your imagination to how horrible and terrifying this thing really is. I still had a damn good time with this film, guys. It pleasantly surprised me, and I was trying to ignore all the reviews that were out on YouTube until I finally saw this, but holy shit, man, it was a great cinematic experience. It's the sound design, the production design as well. You know, we've got a period piece happening in 1971, so a fair few years before the events of the original Omen film. It looks great, it sounds great, it disturbed me, it made me uncomfortable, it gave me the heebie-jeebies, it gave me the willies, and that is exactly what I wanted. Despite those flaws, those two flaws that I have this film, highly recommend checking this one out, guys, but I urge you to check it out on the big screen with that beautiful sound design. With that, I'm going to be giving the First Omen 4 smoking nuns out of 5. I love the nuns in this film, man. They just smoke and they're just kind of badass. So guys, if you have seen the First Omen, drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think it lives up to the legacy of the first film? Again, I was pleasantly surprised with the original Omen film. Brand new to it, loved it, and I love what I saw today. I want to see more stuff like this where they're honoring the mythology of what came first and doing something a little bit different beforehand, but at the same time having this nice slow burn throughout the film that kind of gives you a scare and then goes back to business and then gives you another scare, and it kind of like keeps you on your feet, if that makes sense. Love you guts, and I'll catch you in the next one.